Midway USA brand product designers have one straightforward goal: develop high-quality, technically sound products and deliver them to customers at reasonable prices. If you are immersed in the shooting sports industry and pay close attention to every single detail, you know our products are built right and stand up to everyday use. Who has shooting mats and range bag systems to hunting clothing and just about everything for the outdoors? Log on and shop 24/7 with super fast shipping. MidwayUSA.com.
Looking for an epic charter fishing experience that goes beyond the boat? Want to add in world-class food, festivals, or even football? Come explore everything Louisiana has to offer with a charter fishing trip led by one of Louisiana's top captains. From inshore redfish and speckled trout to offshore tuna and red snapper, from saltwater swordfish to freshwater sac-a-lait. With fishing destinations less than 45 minutes from the airport, Louisiana has something spectacular to offer every fisherman. Go catching with Louisiana's best captains today by planning your next adventure at louisianacharterfishing.com. That's louisianacharterfishing.com.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. We are talking about midges today, and this is not the first time I've talked about midges on the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. If you want to hear more, or you want to try to catch me in a lie and an inconsistency, then you can go back to episode 65. That was all the way back in 2020. Remember that time? We made it. Anyway, that was basically a primer when it comes to midges. I talked a lot about gear, and I talked a little bit about theory, what midges are, how to fish them, what the best things to have on hand to fish them. And then episode 242, a couple years ago, is called Midges, 12 Months of Dry Flies. And that is where I talked all about making sure that you have those 20 and smaller flies in that fly box for when you are fishing on the surface. Today, we'll be covering some of the same ground. I mean, if you think about that kind of 3-circle Venn diagram where each thing shares a little bit with each other, and then there's a little bit in the middle where all three share. I'm sure you could probably make that argument for this podcast, but there's so much that can be said about midges. Midges are on my mind, one, because I'm looking at a fly tying book right now with a midge on the cover, but also I was putting together some content recently for a magazine, and had to look through some midge books from one going all the way back to 1970. And we've certainly come a long way, not just in hooks and the quality of hooks once you get down to the size 24, 26, 28, but also hackles. I do not know where I would be as kind of a novice, kind of intermediate fly tyer if I didn't have the kind of hackles that you can get that are perfectly sized for the hooks. And that's going to be something that we talk about today. We're going to talk about a couple of tactics and techniques, both for beginners and advanced anglers. We're also going to talk about a couple of flies that are absolutely worth having and worth learning how to tie. And we'll start right there. One of my confidence flies. What's a confidence fly? Well, a confidence fly for me, I'll give you a dry, a streamer, and a nymph before I tell you my midge. So the dry fly is going to be a humpy. Whenever I go to the high mountain streams, I know that there's a good chance I'll switch to something a little bit more delicate. There's a chance I'll get something a little more beefy, but I like to start with that size 14 or 16 humpy in yellow or in orange because I like to kind of gauge the fish and what they're doing and where they are using this particular high floating, high visibility fly. I'm not going to be dead set on using it all day. I mean, if they respond to it, fantastic, but it's also just a great prospecting fly. When it comes to streamers, it's hard to beat a woolly bugger, particularly in the way that I like to tie it, on a jig hook with a very, very stringy marabou tail. It's a great way to plumb deep spots, undercut banks, behind rocks, plunge pools, and get that fly down and see if you can even just get a fish to give you a look. And it really straddles the line between lure and fly. But hey, it's a woolly bugger. It's definitely a fly. And then for a confidence fly for a nymph, I like a Prince nymph that's got a couple extra things going for it. I like to have a little bit of a collar on it, and I like to have a little bit of flash. And again, this is a great way where you can kind of easily get a visual on your nymph as it is drifting, whether you are fishing with a tight line situation or you're fishing under an indicator or even just swinging that nymph. You're able to quickly get your eyeballs on that fly. So those are 3 of my confidence flies that I will go to often. When it comes to midges, I think one reigns supreme, and that is the Griffith's gnat. What's the Griffith's gnat? Well, you probably know, but I don't want to make any sort of assumptions. The Griffith's gnat is a hook with thread and hackle, whip finished and sent off for you and I to catch lots of trout with. That's it. I'm sure you can find somebody who makes a fancier version of that, but that is effectively what the Griffith's gnat is. So a couple of things. One, it's a great fly to tie even in the smallest sizes. 2, it's a very diverse fly as far as its applications. Let's talk about why you should learn to tie the Griffith's gnat first. It is as simple as wrapping thread around a hook, palmering a hackle on that fly, understanding some of the techniques that are involved in that, and then finishing it off. Now that's all fine and good, and I would say start by tying what is effectively a Griffith's gnat, and maybe you could do a woolly worm, throw some chenille on there, on a size 12 hook, and then work down to that 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. One summer, I just tried to make beautiful size 28 Griffith's gnats. This was a long time ago, and so finding that the perfect hackle for that was most of the challenge. But then I got working on how do I make these proportions nice? How do I get my thread wraps even? How do I make sure that the hackle is splayed out in the right direction? How do I make sure I'm using the right amount of tension on the hackle pliers? How do I finish off a size 28 hook or size 30 hook? And so it is a great exercise in learning how to tie very deliberately. With a lot of flies, one of the great things is with a lot of flies, again, go back to a woolly worm. You can make all sorts of mistakes and it gets buried in the chenille, and then you have this big head on a size 12 or a size 10 fly, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. But as you get tiny, there's no room for mistakes. The materials are going to break, and the fly is just going to kind of not fall apart, but just not going to look right. The hackle's going to be smashed down. The head's going to come over the hook eye, and so this is a great fly to practice your skills on. So don't start with a 28. If you're a new fly tire or an intermediate fly tire, start with the 18 and get comfortable with that. Then move down to the 20 or, push yourself to the 22 and then go down. So it's a great fly for that from a tying perspective. And you can add your own flair and flavor to it. I'll give you one example. I think traditionally, I don't have it in front of me, but it's grizzly hackle and black thread. I think that's what it is, or dark gray thread. But I have liked to add in a neon thread to it, which I don't think the fish see. I think all that does is it mutes that profile of that fly when they are looking up, particularly when I'm fishing as a dry fly. But using a neon thread, a chartreuse, or a neon orange helps you sight that fly a little bit because it creates some contrast between those grizzly hackles and the thread wraps. If it's wrapped properly, which is a little bit sparsely, then you're going to be able to have that contrast, and also between the water and the fly. And again, I don't think the fish are going to see it, and if they do, it's going to basically just mute that profile of that fly as opposed to make it stand off and stark contrast if you're using something like black thread. But anyway, it's also a diversely applied fly. You can lube it up with all sorts of floatant and fish it dry. And it will float. It will float in those hackle tips, and it does a great job of imitating anything and everything. You can be a little less liberal in the application of floatant, and it's going to kind of float a little bit more flush and present a kind of a true profile of a Griffith's gnat. You can put floatant on it and then submerge it, and now it's going to rest in that surface film. And this is one of the greatest ways to fish this fly because it just looks like a dead bug in that surface film. It looks like an ant. It looks like a mayfly. It looks like a caddis. It's just going to drift right there, right in the surface film. And then you can fish it wet. There's a couple different ways you can do this. One of the ways I like to do it when the fish are just kind of feeding just on the surface is to lube up my tippet with floatant and make sure that dries a little bit, and then cast it out. This can be done in a few different ways. Like if I want this thing to be down something like 6 inches, well, then you tie on, say, like a stretch of 6X, and then a foot to 18 inches of 7X. And you just take that 6X stretch and you cover that with floating and allow that 7X, the terminal stretch of tippet, to go without any sort of floating. And it will, with that fly, as that fly becomes saturated, it is going to drop. But the Griffith's gnat, because it's palmered hackle, does a really cool thing. There's so many other flies you can do this with. I'm just using this as an example. And I would say you can use this with other midges as well. As you cast it, it's going to dry off quickly because of the materials that are involved there. But also, it is going to trap air bubbles. So I have fished Griffith's gnat as a dropper of a nymph rig. It is the end fly on the nymph rig. And so I might be fishing like a size 14 hare's ear with a bead head on it. And then I've got 18 inches to 24 inches. And then I have just a size 26 Griffith's gnat. And as I make those casts, that beadhead hare's ear is going to do its thing. It's going to hit the water and it's going to drop and it's going to drift. But that Griffith's gnat is going to trap some air bubbles between those hackles, and it's just kind of float along right behind that fly in a line. And this does a couple things. So I'm using a hare's ear. I'm using like that prince nymph, assuming that pheasant tail I was talking about earlier. I can kind of use that as my visual indicator of, okay, there's something that should be happening roughly 18 inches behind that fly. So it gives me a good visual indication of where that fly should be. So if I see a flash, then I know to go ahead and set the hook. But that's just one example of kind of the benefits of tying midges and the diversity of opportunities that comes from fishing midges, because these bugs are in the water all the time. When I do macroinvertebrate surveys for fun, for when I'm teaching homeschool co-op groups, the amount of microscopic is the wrong word to use because you can see them with your eyes. Teeny tiny, let's be accurate, right? Really, really tiny bugs, vastly outnumbers the size 10 nymphs that you're going to find in there. I mean, yeah, you're going to find depending on the stream, you're going to find your stoneflies and your caddisflies and your bigger bugs, your hellgrammites, things like that. But the amount of teeny tiny things that are just wormy and squirming around that can fit on your pinky nail and have room on every side, that's what's going to make up your seine net's biomass more than anything else, as far as from a quantity standpoint of organisms. So these bugs are down in the water, so you need to factor them in. A presentation that I've probably mentioned before that I really like. I've already mentioned using it as a dropper with a nymph. Using it as a dropper with a dry fly is also beneficial, and this can happen in a couple different ways. I like to fish a midge, a dry midge, as a second fly in a 2 dry fly rig. I developed is the wrong way to say that, of course, but I started using this personally on a big, almost pond, super glassy area above stream of a low head dam, where the water was just absolutely like glass, and the fish would rise to midges all day long. And it was great if fish were within reasonable casting range, because you make your cast, but you're probably using something like a 12 or 13 or 14 foot leader, going down to something like 6X or 7X when you're using the smallest of flies. And at that point, at the point where you're getting further away from those fish, the 40 plus feet, you're starting to have a difficult time ascertaining precisely where your fly is in relation to everything else that's happened. Because even with a very good cast, with a very good rod, with a well-constructed leader, it's hard to have confidence that that entire leader has perfectly straightened out and unrolled, and from wherever you can see the tip of your fly line, that rise that happened 15 feet out from that is the fish that you are going for. And why is this a concern? Well, these fish rising in this glassy situation, and it can be in even more broken water, they are going to be very, very leery of you pulling that line up very, very quickly over top of them, setting the hook, lining them, and that's going to put them down. So one of the things that I started doing was basically doing a 2 dry fly rig, where you have something like a parachute Adams maybe even an Adams that's tied with like purple dubbing or something like that. And then you've got another 18 inches, and then you have your dry midge with with floating all over it. And so when you make your cast, you can ID that posted parachute fly, and then you know that again, probably something like 18 to 24 inches far from that fly. If you see a rise, that's probably going after your midge. And I think that again, having that visual cue gives you just an opportunity to maybe even sight in on your midge as it is drifting. At that point, once it's 40 feet away from you, it's gonna look like something like a tiny little dimple in the water. But when you see a nose come up underneath that dimple, you can give it a beat and you can set that hook. So that is definitely something that is been beneficial to me. Another tactic or another important thing that I like to consider when I am fishing these small flies, and I know I talked about tippets and I talked about leader construction in one of these previous episodes, but I wanted to focus on knots. Now, recently in one of my accusation podcasts, I brought up how tag ends are overrated, like clipping your tag ends for your flies are overrated on certain flies. I actually would prefer a longer tag end on like a weedless frog or like a Texas rigged worm, for example, if I'm fishing in a lot of weeds with a conventional gear. Um, when you're fishing midges, I think it is very important to have nice, tidy knots, particularly in those last couple of segments of tippet. And here's the reason why. Uh, if you are fishing a midge dry, or you're fishing two fish that are rising to dry midges or midges in the surface film, and you have um, a big knot, either a bad knot or a knot with some tag ends on it, and you cast anywhere close to that fish, they're going to come up and inspect it, and it might freak them out, or they might rise to it. That's happened, I don't know how many times. The last time I was fishing midges, that happened where they kept going for my knot. I had done one of the presentations I alluded to earlier, where you grease up not the last section, that's the word, of tippet, but the penultimate one, the one before that. And that was creating just the most delicate subsurface presentation for that knot. That fly was down, probably less than a quarter inch, but that knot was sitting right there in that surface film. And so that's where all of these teeny tiny little mayflies were sitting as they were getting ready to take off. And so multiple times, my beautifully presented fly was ignored for my perfectly presented knot. And I didn't have a hook in the knot, and so I was unable to get those fish. My solution in that situation was to actually just tie in a much longer piece of tippet at the terminal end there, and just grease that tippet, irrespective of those knots. And what that did was that moved that knot away from the kind of the feeding radius of those particular fish. And those are things to be aware of. Fishing midges, you will sometimes find fish that sit there and just feed in clusters, where they just kind of nose up, nose up, nose up. And when that happens, you have to have some precision. But I also find with a lot of glassy water feeding fish, when the current is not moving very quickly, they'll kind of cruise around and they will rise to various things. So you almost have to not just pattern the timing of their rises, but they're doing a little figure eight pattern. Are they moving up in the pool and then dropping back? And are they feeding on the way back? And if all those things are the case, then you have to plan out when and where you put your cast. Because if they are paying attention to something teeny tiny, they're not paying attention for a hopper to drop in the water. They're not looking for a big hexagenia to, dive bomb. They are looking for the teeniest, tiniest thing. So disturbances on that surface are going to cause them to take notice. Again, that's a little bit of an overgeneralization, because we know they're just fish, and you're going to catch them when you do the wrong things, and you're going to miss them when you do the right things. But those are just a couple things that sprung to mind. The last piece of midge information that I was thinking about today that I wanted to share, it pertains to hooks. Two thoughts on hooks. I check the sharpness of my midge hooks. a lot of times in the wintertime, I've had the fun sharp test where I will prick myself with a midge hook and I don't feel it because it's so tiny and so sharp and barbless. And then once I get in the car and my hands start to warm up, all of a sudden I get this very, very sharp pain because my nerves are like, hey, we forgot about that. But yes, I want to make sure they're sharp. I want a great penetration if I'm using that 26, 28, size 30 hook. And it's a very delicate sharpening process to grab your hook hone and run that teeny tiny fly. But if that hits if you've caught a fish, if you have gotten it snagged, then they're so light wire that not only could they be easily dulled or burred, but they can also get bent. So I like to inspect my my hooks, and I have to be more deliberate with it because I do not. I use compartment boxes for my midges, with individual compartments, so that if I have one open and the wind blows or I drop it, it's not the end of the world. But little individual compartments. So I'm not sticking the fly into foam or into rubber or anything like that. So I need to be deliberate to look at it before I drop it in there, before I pull it out, to make sure that there's no bend, and then run across my thumbnail to make sure it still has some bite to it, that it hasn't gotten burred or dulled up. And secondly, barbless I think is I prefer barbless across the board, but I think barbless is absolutely essential. And I think it's hard to come across those teeny tiny hooks with barbs on them anymore. But and other thing is upturned eye. I think upturned eye is helpful for especially for flies you're going to be fishing dry. I think it creates a better presentation, and it also kind of gets that knot so that it is not as in line with that fly. Because if you're using even 7X and you have like a size 26 fly, you do like a 5-wrap improved clinch knot. That's a kind of a big bubble in front of it, and so I like what the upturned hook eye does when it comes to that fly presenting on the water. So a very much random assemblage of midge thoughts, but this is being recorded in the middle of October, and in my mind, the only dry fly fishing I'm going to have consistently between now and April, May is going to be with midges. And if I'm going to be fishing nymphs, I probably need to make sure I'm fishing in those smaller flies also, whether they be an improvised use of a hackled fly like I was talking about today, or a true subsurface nymph. That's going to be in my future. So any questions, any comments about nymphs, do let me know. Matthew at castingacross.com. As always, happy to hear from you. This week on the podcast, first article is called Conservation Smarter, Not Harder. This is where I, almost put my toe into current events and political issues. But I am a big fan of calling out hypocrisy. If it comes on the left, if it comes on the right, if it's in secular culture, if it's in religion, I think hypocrisy is just it's a evidence of a failed argument, right? Evidence of a lack of seriousness or a reliance upon some other source. And so this article touches on a big solar field that just is, it's bad news for the environment. Anything that it's saving in fossil fuel consumption, it's very, very hard to, and it hasn't been doing that. But it's hard to imagine the justification of folks who are truly green if they look at the whole picture. And so this is talking about that, about how pragmatism is not the way to go when it comes to conservation. And I put some definitions in there as well. And then Wednesday's article is called Video, the Streamer Authority. And this is a video where I share and talk about George Daniels' 2015 book Strip Set. It is a book that is all about fishing streamers, and it is obviously a very, very popular work in the last 10 years. This week's recommendation on the podcast is another Midge book. Fishing the Midge by Ed Koch. I think it came out in 1970. So, man, look at that. We are talking about 55 years. There's a revised edition, the one I have, from 1988. But it is a great look at, 1, flies you can tie, 2, how to fish them, and as always is the case, some good little history and anecdotes thrown in there. It's got a foreword by Joe Brooks, so a little value added there. I'm looking at used copies right now on the internet, and you can get paperbacks for $5. What a deal. I think that's the only Ed Koch book that I have that I don't have in hardback, actually. So if you know of a nice copy and a first edition at that, let me know. Matthew@castingacross.com. I'll put a link to where you can find used copies of that book at a bargain price in the show notes for this podcast page over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.
Bow hunting all comes down to a moment. And in the moment, you want equipment on your bow that will get the job done. Trophy Ridge products are the tools bow hunters trust. React technology sights, rests, stabilizers, and quivers to help a bow hunter be successful in the field. And those tools are from Trophy Ridge.
This episode is brought to you by Boat Trader, America's largest boating marketplace. Whether you're buying, selling, or upgrading, the Boat Trader app makes it easy. With the biggest selection of new and used boats from dealers and private sellers. Browse, compare, and even apply for financing. All in one place. Download the Boat Trader app and start your search today.